Let's jump right in. It is now law. We all have to play the game. So buyer broker agency is here. The good news is, and matter of fact, we were supposed to have a different topic today, but Aldo and I were on our last coaching call. He's like, hey, 7 months in, and he started to share some things with me about what he's learned. And I was like, okay, stop. We're restructuring. Are you available on the 19th? Because you got to share this with everybody else. So he pushed Josh Hoey back. And so we have Aldo, who's been doing buyer broker agency for 7 months, 7.5 months now, I guess we should say. So that being said, Aldo, take it away.
Yeah, appreciate it. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, my name's Aldo. I'm up here in Bellingham, Washington. So I'm about an hour and a half north of Seattle. If you guys are ever up here, it's a beautiful area right on the water. But yes, let's talk about buyer's agency. I'm assuming everybody knows exactly what a buyer agency is. Let me give you a little bit of a background of kind of how it came. Washington, I think, and Colorado were one of 2 states that really started implementing this and by law in January of 2024. So back in 2019, our MLS already started things. We started to share what the SOC was going to be. People freaked out about that. Like, oh my gosh, all my buyers, they're all going to know exactly how much I'm going to get paid. It didn't really change much. And then so on and so forth, the contracts and everything started to change pretty rapidly in 2020, 2021, 2022. So things started changing. And then, of course, we heard back around this time last year that Washington State was going to require by law a buyer's agency agreement that we will need to negotiate with our buyers. We didn't know if sellers were going to be able to offer compensation. So the only difference, I think, in my state compared to the other states is that Washington State did not opt in to follow the Association of Realtor rules and guidelines, and we're still able to share the SOC in the MLS. I know everybody else, you can't do that. So that's the biggest difference that we've had. Now, a lot of people have freaked out, and let me spend just 2 minutes kind of touching on this subject on, I think people are going to be making a bigger deal about this than it's really going to come. And I feel like when COVID hit, when interest rates hit 7.5%, 8.5%, and now buyer's agency agreements, everyone is making things a lot bigger to where I felt like I need to stay focused in the business and to trying to really, take more listings, help my buyers, and do all that. So that's just kind of the way that mentally I have been thinking about buyer's agency agreements. So buyer's agency, yes, a lot of the people in our area in January, we were just wondering how this all was going to be. Now, you have to...
I can't see. It's Milpitas Boulevard. Is that what it is? Okay. Yeah. Remember, I was like, I can't see because the building was right there. Yeah, it took me all the way down.
Hey,
I don't get that.
Mute.
If you guys have questions in the meantime, please put them in the chat. And then Michael, if you can interrupt me and ask any questions, just let me know. Am I good? Okay, so yes, it was very new to us. We had no idea what it was going to be like. We did have a lot of people. You'd be surprised. There wasn't as many people that asked us about buyer's agency agreements than we thought it was going to be. Everybody, yes, it's on the news. It's everywhere you hear it. This big lawsuit. Oh my gosh, like I'm going to have to start paying for my own agent, all this stuff. Everything you probably have been hearing from your agents, we've been hearing about a year ago from people in our area, wondering who I'm going to pay, how I'm going to pay it, how am I going to bring in this extra money. So I'm going to tell you the experiences that I've had. So the first month or two were just kind of weird because nobody really knew how things were changing or what things were going to be like. But we've gone through probably 6 or 7 different variations of buyer's agency agreements in our Northwest MLS through this last 6-7 months. So just know that this variation of whatever you're going to be signing may not be the last and final one. We started with, hey, we could negotiate our commission. We could have our buyers say, hey, I don't want to go see any houses if they're listed below 2% or 2.5%. So we had all these options, and now we've come to one. So like I said, if you're just joining, we in Washington State, we can actually still have our SOC on the Northwest MLS. Now, the biggest difference right now, also, we are putting everything at 3% on our buyer's agency agreement, because I think by law and you're everywhere else, if somebody's offering 3% and you're only having 2.5% on your buyer's agency agreement, by law and really by moral compass, you can't take 3%. You have to take 2.5%. So we've been putting 3%. Now, let me tell you, my first 6 months were pretty listing heavy. We have seen maybe very, very few agents that have actually put out 0%. And those 0% listings stay on the market for a very, very, very long time. We have a few 2%, but most of them are going to be 2.5%. And that's really important to know, because I think a lot of really good agents are going to battle for a buyer. Because if my duty is to sell a listing, I want to know, and I want my seller to know, the benefits of actually giving commission on the buyer side. Because for buyers right now in some markets, I would say I'm in a higher price market. I'm not luxury market, but our average house here in our county is around 700,000, which I think is fairly high for the area that we live in. So not only is somebody bringing in, let's say, $70,000 for a down payment, somebody then all of a sudden they're going to have a 6.5%, 7% interest rate. So their payment's already going to be $4,500, $5,000. And now on top of that, they're going to be bringing in an additional 2.5%, 3%. So these are things that I'm talking with my seller is like, if our goal is to sell your house, we want to advocate for a buyer's agent so they can come in and they don't have to feel like their buyer now doesn't want to buy your home because they have to bring in additional $10,000 or $20,000 out of pocket. So the first few months, kind of pretty weird. Didn't really know how things were going, but as new agency agreements started to roll out, things started changing and things started kind of be a little bit more set in stone. So these last probably 5 or 6 buyers agencies, I feel like it does elevate us as real estate agents to a higher level, because we are now bound. And yes, I always, sorry to say it, but I ran my business off of loyalty. And if you were committed to me, I was committed to you. And probably all of you out there are saying, well, shit, I've gotten burned. And yes, I've gotten burned many, many times where people are like, well, this person, my aunt, my uncle, whatever it is, open house. But now the buyers agencies that now people are really comfortable with them, it is so powerful. I've had a client that I was showing houses with on Sunday, and they just like, oh, thank you so much for giving me your time. I appreciate it. And I said, absolutely. I was like, Dustin, you realize when we were talking about our buyer's agency and that you said, hey, I'm going to hire you as my agent. It's the same thing for you. Now I know you are committed to me. I'm going to give you my time, whether that's on Sunday in the afternoon, on Tuesday evening, whenever I can fit it within my own personal time. Like, this is how our relationship works. Like, so that's why I feel like it has elevated a lot of people's professionalism and fiduciary duties for buyers. And so with the buyers agencies, I do talk with every single one. I have different sort of emails. So before I go out and I actually meet somebody on Zoom or in person, I do have a nice lengthy email. And I say, hey, this is what we're going to talk about: market trends, expectations. And then I say in bold, of course, commission, who's paying for it, how it's being paid for. So I want people to know that this is what we're going to be talking about in our buyers meeting. And it's a lot of people now know that this subject's going to come up, and a lot of people have a lot of questions. Who's going to pay for it? Luckily for us in Northwest MLS, I can go and I can pull all of our listings or potential homes that we may be looking for in the city, the area, wherever, and I can show people like, hey, you're going to be paying, these sellers are going to be offering at least 2.5%, if not more. I do tell them now, because I feel like I said, we're just better. I tell them like, listen, guys, I will ask for 3% every single time. And I will ask for the seller to pay the difference. But for no means will this 3% ever come between you and the house. if we're in multiple offer situation, we will definitely take 2.5% or whatever the offer is, but nothing below 2%. So if they do, or 2.5%, so they will have to come up with between 2 and 2.5%. But anything that's 2.5 or higher, they won't have to pay it for out of pocket. But there has been some pushback, especially with people who are calling you off of your listings. If you're doing a lot of PPC leads, if you're just doing a lot of social media leads, any sort of leads that they don't know you and they just want to say, hey, Julie, yeah, I want to go look at this house. Well, it's not so much like, hey, yeah, I'll be there right away. I do let them know. I say, hey, Julie, have you heard of what's going on in the market right now with buyer's agency agreements? A lot of people say, oh, no, I'm not sure. Or some people say, yeah, I have. I say, well, listen, by law now, I have to have you sign this if you want to work with me. And then I start explaining the benefits to them. The way I explain the benefits is say, guys, listen, you are going to be bound to a real estate agent. The way I work my business is off of loyalty. Obviously, now we have laws that will have us go ahead and sign all these things. I just don't run out and open houses anymore. And some of you may be shocked that, hey, I still kind of do that, and that's okay. But I feel like I'm somewhere in my business that I'm not just going to go open a door at 4 p.m. or whenever just because they want to go look at a house, because most of the time they have an agent or they're trying to do something on their own. I have had probably 3 or 4 people, and that's why it's really, really important for you guys to qualify them and ask them questions, because you will find out, A, oh, my agent's out of town, so I just really want to get in here. Or B, oh, well, yes, actually, I do have an agent, but, like for us, there's a lot of people that come up into our area. So, oh, my agent's in Seattle. He just told me to call around. So this does help you not waste time. So buyer's agency agreements have been really, really good. The biggest thing that we've probably seen, I guess more on the business side, is that our average commission went from about a 2.55 and now we're up to a 2.85. So their average buyer side, now we've started seeing probably $1,500 to $2,200 additional on the buying side, because I don't know about how your market is right now, but homes aren't really flying off the shelf. Yes, there's a couple that are in certain areas, but a lot of the ones that people are looking at, they've been on the market for 2-3 weeks, if not longer. And so that has been a really great thing, I would say, business-wise on our part, that we've gotten 2.75, 3% on a lot of these buyers agencies. So let me read a question here. So what percent of the time has the seller wanted to negotiate the buyer agent commission, especially if the offer comes in way below the seller expectation? So yeah, on the seller side, so obviously it's our Northwest MLS, it says, how much do you want to pay a listing agent? How much do you want to pay a buyer's agent? Right. I've yet to be in a situation where a seller says, I'm paying 0 to the buyer's agent. I don't know how I will actually take that. I don't know if I will take the listing or how I will actually go about that. So I can't answer that. Now, it's set in stone in the very beginning of how much a seller wants to pay. Is it 3%, 2.5%, whatever it is. So my job, I always try to advocate for 6%. Right? Always try to do it. Now, if we can't, I'll either do 2.75 or I'll take 3%, right? On a $1 million listing, I just spent probably $3,500 on a $1 million listing to get it listed. I'm taking 3% and I'm giving away 2.5%. So the seller can't negotiate back on the amount that they're willing to give. Now, on the buying side, yes, once again, I did have a seller do a pushback and saying, hey, well, we're not going to sell it to you for $805 with 3%, but we'll sell it to you at $805 at 2.5%. I had that conversation with my clients. I'm like, hey, here's what it is. Earlier, I told you I'm not going to get in the way. Would you like me to have 3% still, or do you want to take it for $805? It's kind of a weird question and kind of puts them in an awkward state, but I tell them, hey, I'm here for you guys. I'm willing to do that if you're okay buying the house for $805,000. So we just came into that situation. we got it for $805,000. At the end of the day, 2.5% on 800,000 is still really, really good. So there will be some pushback there, which I just got, but I do explain to a lot of my buyers, like my goal is to try to save you a lot of money. I just painted a house near our area and we got $40,000 off the list price, and I got 3%, and that was an $825,000 house as well. So just know you will probably get a little bit of pushback the more and more you're actually going into your buyer's agency and you're talking about the actual fiduciary duties and actually what you're doing for your commission. Don't sound like you're selling yourself. Oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. Just explain to them why it's important and what you're going to be doing. And this is bound, like I am your person, right? You can go to open houses and feel safe now. A lot of people, that's probably one of the biggest things, is a lot of people are like, well, what about open houses? I'm like, yeah, you can go. When they tell you to sign in, just tell them, hey, I'm working with an agent, and put my information down. I've signed a buyer's agency agreement. Now, for people who are hosting a lot of open houses, that might not be a great thing, but it's still on a buying side. It's really, really important, and it's really more comforting for a buyer knowing that they're not going to go into open house and somebody's going to try to, sell them or whatnot. For you guys, because you can't see SOCs, is we thought that was coming here in the very beginning, that we weren't going to be able to share any SOCs. So a lot of the people I network, what we started to do to practice for that is, I would say, going back and being a really good agent and calling somebody and saying, hey, Robert, like I see your house on 123 Main Street. What's important to your seller on this? Have a open-ended question for those people, and then ask them about what you're paying for commission. I would highly suggest, don't just call an agent and say, hey, are you paying 3% or 2.5%? Okay, cool, thanks, bye. Ask them what's important to them. Like, go back and see what it is, so that way you can tailor that exact same showing and or offer in the future to your buyer. And you can let your clients know, hey, absolutely, here's a list. We're going to go see 3 houses. Okay, sweet, Jairus. So this is, 123 Main Street. They're doing 2.5. You can see whatever, 123 Banana Street, 2.75, whatever it is. So this is going to force you to just be a better agent. I've been really happy with the buyer's agency agreements. Like I said, it's kind of elevated our professionalism and our duties to our buyers. One thing you will get asked from your buyers, and it's depending how you're going to be running your business, and it's going to say, what happens if I have to pay you? And I say, that's a great question. Because they're going to say, hey, Aldo, I'm already putting $30,000 down, and then my mortgage payment's going to be $4,500. How am I going to be paying for my $30,000 down, and then I have to bring in $10,000 in closing costs? Like, how am I going to have to pay you an additional, $15,000? And I say, it's a very important question, and I'm glad that you asked. I said, this is how we're going to go about that. Usually my job is to try to get you a really good deal. And in these houses that we've been seeing, because our market is trending this way, the homes are starting to sit on the market, I want you to save as much money as you can out of pocket. So if we're buying a house for $500,000 and your closing costs are going to be $10,000 on $500,000, I'm going to try to get that incorporated into the loan. Same thing with the commission. By any means, if you have to pay for your commission, the worst case is that instead of paying $500,000 for a house, you're going to pay $515,000 for a house. That is the worst case possible. So I haven't been down the road where it's been worst case possible, but I feel like I do a really good job, or I try to do a good job. And a lot of agents who are really good at their jobs are trying to get 2.5%, 3%, because if some seller wants $500,000 and pays 0, why not just sell it for $515,000 and give away commission? So they already feel like they're already paying for that. So, sorry if I blabbered a lot, but is there any specific questions, or I can go more into, I guess, experiences if I didn't touch enough on that. there anything that people are afraid of, or they feel like they're going to miss out on opportunities? I mean, that's probably a pretty good question of like, what if buyers don't want to sign this?
Question for you is your open houses, are you still getting people coming in on their own?
Yeah, so our open houses, I mean, it depends on the area. Our open houses aren't as active as I feel like they used to be, but I feel like before buyer's agency, they're still not as good. There is things I kind of talk to. I've always tried to do open houses and trying to share and to try to sell the house, regardless of if it's my house or not. But a very important question, I don't really say, hey, have you signed a buyer's agency agreement already? You know, I just rephrase it a little bit better. I was like, hey, has anyone taken the time to show you what it takes to buy a house in today's market? Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know what? Maria over at Keller Williams, she's our agent. We just signed a buyer's agency agreement. Oh, perfect. Instead of just trying to, hey, buyer's agency, do you have one? Do you have one? Do you have one? Right? Because then you feel like I can say this because I used to sell cars, but you do sound like a car salesman. It's like, hey, did you buy one? Hey, did you sign one? No, okay, and then next. So because at the same time, you want to help people too. So
Of course, yeah.
Have you had any buyers say they've been paying the commission all along and the prices aren't going down to cover them not paying it anymore? Because really the seller pays the commission, but the buyer is the one who paid the price of the house.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm a very 100% transparent. I tell people my job is to tell you, my job is to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And I say that on the listing side and I say that on the buying side. And it's a very open, fun conversation. And I tell people, I say, listen, is it Jairus is your name?
Yes.
I say, Jairus, look at on the opposite side. If I was listing your home and it was worth $500,000 and you're offering 0%, I would tell you to not sell your home for $475,000. Because if you're offering 7 or 8% on your house, that doesn't mean that your house is going to be worth now $510,000. We're going to sell it for what it's for. And I tell them I'm not too worried about if they aren't. The market is going to bear what the market bears. If they're not offering any, that house is still worth that same amount. And then I tell them, and I go through, because in our buyer's agency, I don't know what yours states, but we are allowed to negotiate with the seller on commission still. So I tell them, hey, okay, if they're not willing to do it, I'm still going to put it in there and I'm going to negotiate with them for you not to pay it out of pocket.
We have some questions in the chat. So Carly's asking about open houses. What is the strategy to get unrepresented buyers at open houses if she can't ask them about what they're looking for?
How long have I been looking? Get unrepresented buyers at open house, like 2 open houses. I mean, so one of the strategies we use that Mike has given us is obviously video and or ads to bring people into open houses. I've never been a proponent of somebody just having a sign-in sheet. That's probably just not who I am. People run their business this way. I'm not saying that like I'm judging you whatsoever, but that's just not me. I want people to sign in because they want to work with me. But I do ask a lot of questions of like, hey, has anyone taken the time? Or if somebody, oh, I've been looking at houses. Oh, how have you been looking at them? A lot of people will say, oh, online. Or they'll say, oh, my agent's been taking me. Or if they just say, oh, online, like, oh, well, what about this house did you really like? Because I think open houses, like when I used to sell cars, that was really, really hard. Open houses are much harder than selling a car because people are in and they're out. So trying to create a relationship with somebody and try to serve them as best as you can and trying to figure it out, like, hey, has anyone taken the time to show you what it takes to buy a house in today's market? If they say, well, no, not really, I say, great. I thought we got along. I'm a very casual ask. I say, oh, I feel like Jairus, we had a great conversation. I feel like we get along great. Can I have your information? And a lot of people will say yes to that. Or they'll say, oh, not right now. Actually, we're working with Robert, over at Remax. So, and I say, oh, okay, great. No, absolutely. And I'm like, then at that time, I feel like it's more appropriate to say, oh, great. So did you guys sign a buyer's agency agreement with him? Say, oh, well, no, not yet. I'm like, oh, okay, tell me more about that. I love open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. Or, oh, why not? Some people are like, oh, we haven't really, seen stuff with him. And the first person we met, I say, no problem. I try to go back and I ask him, well, here, guys, let me grab your information. Let's have a little chat. We can grab a beer, grab a coffee. We can do a Zoom call. Let's get to know each other a little bit better. If at the end of the day you want to work with me, great. I'd love to work with you. If not, no problem. We'll part as friends. So I take it in a very pretty casual approach instead of just trying to harp on them. So obviously different markets are different, right? In the East Coast, like in Boston, people are sharks. And I feel like I could say that because I network with a guy in Boston and they're in there and they ask hard because that's just how their personalities are. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just asking because I'm a brand new agent. So one of the tactics they teach you for getting buyers is to host open houses for the other listing agents, right? And so that's like one of the main ways that you prospect is by doing open houses, like 3 or 4 a week, and now it feels like I'm being hand tied. Like I can't actually talk to people about anything but the weather unless they sign something. And I don't want to be that pushy salesperson that says, oh, you have to sign this in order for me to tell you about anything,
Yeah. I mean, there's people still in our area, and I'm sure in your area, they'll still go show a house, right? I mean, I'm not gonna call the Northwest MLS and say, hey, so-and-so didn't have a buyer's agency agreement, and they just showed a house. Like, that's not who I am. I'm focused on my own business. I would just say start those conversations. And a very important question that you probably should just repeat over and over and over is kind of how I've said it, or you tailor it to however your sort of tone or what you feel confident saying, right? Whatever you say confidently probably isn't something that I'm going to say confidently. And you just kind of change your words. I honestly take probably 5 or 6 different ways and I plug it into ChatGPT and I say, give me 5 or 6 different ways of how I can say this. Repeat it over. Which one do you like best? Mix them and match them. And then that could be the way you say it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, Omar?
Hey, Aldo, I have a couple of questions. So you mentioned that in your MLS, you're still able to put SOC, which I'm assuming is seller offer compensation.
Yes.
Is that like a specific amount or just hinting that seller is willing to help with buyer agent compensation?
Yeah, they still do 2.5%, 3% actual percentage in our MLS. So our
They do allow
MLS
that.
opted to not follow the guidelines of it. And they say we're being transparent. Like by not doing that, the whole reason why this whole lawsuit started was because we weren't transparent and everything was fixed. And so our MLS was like, well, we feel like we're not being transparent by not showing an SOC. Yeah, they can. We still have it, which has been nice.
Okay, and my second question is, sorry, so since you've implemented the change, has it been pretty much a pretty even market where it's one offer on a property, or have you had to deal with it where it's multiple offers and then your buyer agent compensation can become an issue because obviously a seller is going to choose when it comes down to it, that might make the difference between a buyer getting the house or not, right?
Yeah.
Whether an agent is willing to come down on their commission.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So like I said, if I know there's going to be multiple offers, I'm not going to go for 3%. Like I said, I've really adapted to my clients. Like my very first priority is going to be my clients. And I've really honed in on that. Like if they want to walk on a house or if they're whatever the decision, I'm there to support them. And I'm there to talk it out with them. Obviously, when I was a brand new agent, it wasn't so much like that because I also needed to make money. So obviously that's changed pretty big. But I know in multiple offer situations, we could still ask for it. It kind of goes back to that what if questions. There's a lot of what ifs. I try not to focus too much on the what ifs, but if that ever does happen, I feel like my buyer and I will have a conversation. And also when you are making offers, there's been, I'm sure everybody in here has made offers to where you weren't the highest or had the best terms, but also relationships with the other agents came into factor, love letters, whatever it was, different financing, whatever it could have been. You're not, just because you're the highest and best doesn't always mean you're going to win. So at that point, you know, I would, on a multiple offer situation, I would just agree with whatever it is for me, for my sake. But for you guys that you can't, you know, I would just go in and tell the buyers, I would really, and confidently, the moment that your clients see that you're not confident is the moment they're going to start really questioning, and they're really going to start to wonder if you're the right fit. So when they ask you, what is your commission? It's 2.5%, Jairus, it's 2.5%, or whatever it is, right? If they ask you, hey, Omar, what's your commission? You're like, oh, well, you know, I wanted to talk to you about that. And, you know, I was thinking like, well, like 2 or 2.5, like, don't do that. Just say, hey, you know what, Omar, my standard right now that I practice is 2.5%, right? Anything above that we do is great. Anything below, we will have a conversation on that. And that's definitely one of the biggest topics that we will talk about in our buyers, not buyer's agreement, but in our buyer presentation on Thursday at 12 or whatever it is.
Love that. Confidence is key. I'm Robert. We'll get to you in a second. I just want to take one moment to make sure that you remember, because some of the things Aldo's saying is not going to be consistent across all markets and with all MLSs. Like, for sure, the MLS being put, or the commission in the MLS, is a unique thing to Washington. So make sure, especially for those of you going to Summit and you're good at this, conversation is going to come up a lot over the next week. When you're having the conversations, always ask what state they're in, what boards they're working with, and then you have to take any information you get and feedback and run it by your own boards. Yes. I'm even noticing as a coach that even within states, some boards are handling certain parts of this, such as open houses, etc., a little slightly different. So it's not even like I'm a part of CAR, so therefore we have one set of rules. No, one board may have slightly different rules versus a different. So keep that in mind. It's really important that you do your own homework too. Robert, what did you have for us?
All right, so mine is bringing it back to open houses and understanding that we're all in different states. The answer could vary, but what do we need to know about open houses now? I mean, are we not supposed to answer, you know, if somebody walks in and says, what's the square footage? Are we not supposed to answer that?
So, good question. So we just, I feel like we have really good lawyers at our brokerage that we have. So for our state, it kind of goes back to two things. If you're hosting an open house, I think it's a disservice to the, either is it going to be your agent, or if you're not doing your own, it's the agent, right? And to the seller, if you're not answering these questions, right? If it's for your own here in Washington state, and I feel like a lot of states are similar, that you still, as a seller, if you're representing the seller, you still have fiduciary duty to your seller. So yes, you have to answer these questions. Like, I don't play the fear game of if somebody's going to call and say, hey, Aldo was just telling my client the square footage and the price and what's important to the seller, but they're not working with them, they're working with me. That they're a very inexperienced agent, or they have no idea what they're doing, or they're having really bad mentorship from wherever it's coming from. So if it's for your own listing, just answer all the questions, be there for them, because ultimately you're there for your seller and you're there to answer all these questions. And in Jairus, in California, you can't discuss it at all if you're representing the seller. I'm sorry, but if I was in California, I would just talk to the buyer. I don't care. What are they going to do? But like, oh, hey, this guy, I'm going to sue him because he told me answers that he wasn't supposed to. I don't know. I would feel a little bit odd about that.
Yeah, I would double check, because that's not what I've heard, Jairus. You have to do whatever it takes to sell the home. Otherwise, you're not representing the sellers very, very well. And if you're not proven to represent your sellers well, then the seller has a legal action against you, because you did not represent their property correctly by sharing the proper information. So double check with that one, Jairus, because I have not heard that in California.
It's a double back on that. I mean, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but it is very, very important And I'm gonna say maybe along like the cloud brokerages where you don't have really a designated broker like near you. But in our state, we can actually, so our state overrules NAR. So whatever our state actually regulates is over what NAR regulates. So in our state, we can actually go show houses to people without a buyer's agency agreement. Right.
No, that's
So we're
just
still-
Washington, though.
That's just, yeah, and that's the Washington. So that's
The
what I'm
old-
saying is go to your broker and you
Right.
need to understand this as best as you can. And yes, there is going to be a lot of what if scenarios and this and that, but you want to understand it and then kind of tailor it to how you run your business.
But and to further just the last minute on for Jairus, you cannot talk about other properties with the buyer. You can only talk about the one you have a signed contract with the seller that you have a fiduciary duty to represent that seller and that home. And as long as you're not representing the person buying it at all, you're just acting as the seller's representative. You can
Yes.
answer any questions that you want, but do not start to engage in a conversation about them buying the
Yes.
home. Now you've
Right.
just stepped over and now you're becoming a buyer representative and you can't do that.
And then for anybody on social media that does quite a bit of social media, I think one of the biggest questions I get asked is like, how much have you been promoting this or trying to ask questions? And it's been like 0%. People are going to hear news, and yes, I've done a few posts where it's like, hey, this is misleading. It's not really true. If you have questions, DM me or reach out to me, text me. A lot of people just will hear the news, but they're not actually selling or they're not actually buying. I don't want to create even more confusion and more. I don't want to stir up the pot even more if I don't have to. The news, whatever channel you're in, doesn't even matter. They're all going to do that for you already. So I've touched very lightly on it, just kind of with like interest rates as well. Touched kind of very, very lightly on it. I've gone up and down a little bit with when they've gone up and gone down, but obviously your business, if you want to educate your clients all about it, do you, but I've done very, very little of it. And because you'd be surprised also, there's a lot of people that will come to you and they don't know what you're talking about and or are very confused about it all. And it's our job to really educate them on it all, because at the end of the day, it's really not what it seems. It's kind of just normal. You just have this one representation of, hey, yes, you're hiring me, I'm committed to you, and I hope that a lot of you guys are going to advocate to have that buyer's SOC or buyer's agency commission when you're listing houses.
Danny Beach, you have a question?
No, it wasn't a question. I was just gonna piggyback on what Jairus had said, that I get where she was saying implied representation, but you have a fiduciary duty to disclose the material facts of the home because you're there representing the seller. So as long as you don't engage in any other conversation of any other properties here in California, then that implied does not exist. That's when you do the temporary buyer rep agreement.
Perfect. Anything else? Any other questions? Thank you, Aldo. This is good. Any questions as we're wrapping up?
There's two more questions in the chat.
Okay,
One of them was about, are you worried about homes appraising?
Oh,
Especially if you're rolling in the commission in the home price.
we haven't had that trouble yet. Like I said, I would say maybe bigger, larger markets, you'll have a lot more zeros of SOCs. We've also seen them in Seattle. We haven't seen a lot of SOC, and that's a pretty large market. So we've seen 2.5%, 3% still. But I can't really answer that. But at the same time, if somebody's willing to pay $515 for a house and comps, it's all about comparables, then that's kind of our other job, is to try to sell it to them and say, hey, yeah. And I have a feeling maybe that appraisers are going to start taking account these SOCs, that they're like, hey, okay, it's 500 grand. It's that you're paying 510. That's including, because they also take into account closing costs, right? So it's not much different because it's just another cost on top of that. So yeah, like I said, to kind of wrap it up, what we've seen, a building, our trust is really, really high and transparency is great with all of our clients. People know like we're advocating for them and like, hey, this is a signed agreement. Again, on the weekends, evening times, whenever you're out, you got to explain to them this is a big benefit for buyers. Go to open houses. No one else is going to try to steal you. I also know that I can trust you because I'm here for you. And we're here as a team to get you into your next home or sell your next home or whatever it is. So.
Perfect. All right, we have one more question, and that is Renee's asking if you can talk about the email that you send to prospects before you meet them.
Yeah, I'll send you 2 emails. One probably isn't as relevant to some others, but when I send over the buyer's agency agreement, I do have a nice email that I send to people as well. And I can get you a copy and I can send it to Mike. And I just do, hey, again, here's a buyer's agency agreement. This is what it entails. For any reason that a house is under X amount, you will have to pay the difference. What we've seen, and obviously I can use this email now because we've had experience, but it is true. What we've seen is that most sellers are paying X amount %. So you won't have to pay for it. I will be really happy to see, hopefully in a lot of markets, that most sellers will start to pay some SOC or buyer's agent commission on their side. Because here in our state, the seller still has an option. And I'm sure in all your new forms, there's what they're paying for a listing and what they're going to be paying for a buyer, regardless if that's 0% or 3%. There's a section in there that a seller has to put in there what he's willing to pay another agent.
Awesome. I want to leave you guys with a thought here, something that's been going on in the coaches circles. It's not a reality at all by any stretch, but you know Tom and how he is always pushing things and he's always trying to think of what's next and what's going to come next. What would the world look like if this were to happen? And it's just a reminder that even if you see 0% SOC on the listing, it doesn't mean you can't make an offer. Everything is negotiable. Sometimes there are homeowners out there that are telling their agents, I do not want to offer any buyer's commission. But then when the house sits on the market for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, and then why not just write an offer saying, if you're willing to give 2.5 buyer concession, here's what we're willing to pay, and see what they do. Because here's the thought process that I'll leave everybody with. It's an interesting thing to think about. What would the world look like if every listing was 0% SOC and it was just all a negotiation? And everybody could write their offer in, okay, we want this buyer broker, or we want this buyer commission, we want buyer concession, we want that buyer concession. What if every listing agent just said, it's a 0%, now come and make an offer?
To add on that, Mike. So what we've seen in our market also is that if homes aren't selling, people are bumping up the SOC. Instead of doing a $10,000, $20,000 price drop, people are going from 2.5% to 3% or 3.5%. So wow. People, it's like, okay, well, why would I go down 10,000 when I can go, up, or I can go down $4,000 or $5,000? So we're starting to see that even more and more because sellers are realizing, well, if I just give more commission, it's less than if I'm knocking 20 grand off the price of the house. So I'll be surprised to see what everybody else's markets are doing. But yes, people, like, one of the biggest falses that I think sellers are coming to realization, the less I pay, the more I'm going to make. And it's completely wrong. It's like the more you pay, the better you're incentivizing somebody to come in here and work that much harder, because none of us want to go and make money for less than what you think you're worth. So we have started seeing a lot higher commissions because sellers are starting to realize, like, it's harder to sell a house right now. I don't know about your guys' markets, but things aren't just flying off the roof. So that's something to keep in mind too, to kind of make you feel a bit better, like, okay, it's not all doom and gloom.
Awesome. Thank you, Aldo. Great information. Really appreciate it. Well done. And I hope everybody took something away from this. And for those of you that are going to Summit, I will see you in Dallas. Otherwise, next week, we got our full schedule of calls. If you're scheduled, we're doing it. And the week after, no calls, I'll be in Dallas. So hope to see y'all there.
I'm also gonna be in Dallas, so see you guys there.
Of course. Okay. See you guys.
All right, have a
Thanks.
good one.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Aldo.
Thanks, Aldo.
Thanks, everyone.